Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew. Man, Marie.
Wow. From the grim dystopia, the darkest timeline, we join you.
Truly the darkest timeline.
Man, we rolled the dice and we got the darkest timeline.
I can't believe that the same timeline that has that crazy like KFC chicken sandwich with chicken as the beef and then as the meat and then also as the buns
could produce this horror as well.
I never would have thought. You know, it reminds me. So listeners, we thought that we did the series we did a shortened series on cults because, you know, it ended up being a little dark. And we were like, you know what? Let's just check in with listeners. Let's see how they're doing. Because
this is our check-in.
This is our check-in episode.
This is our little home therapy.
Yeah, you know, and we've had a lot of stuff happen in the time since we last put out an episode. And we thought we would just kind of talk a little bit about the effect of COVID on, you know, all of us, but then also on like the chemical industry generally too, because I think that's sort of interesting, or in the engineering industry.
Yeah.
Which is a part of it that like hasn't. I don't know. You hear about on the news like all this stuff about, you know, COVID being bad, and, you know, I mean, it is bad, right? We do not endorse COVID on this show.
We're not pro-COVID.
This is like, can you tell I'm out of practice here a little bit, Marie? You know,
I gotta tell you, man, like I put my speakers on, or I put my headphones on. I'm calling my headphones my speakers. I put them on upside down practically today. I'm all messed up.
Yeah. So listeners, the main thing that's happened since last time we recorded is I moved.
Yeah.
Across the United States, which was insane during COVID. It was
into a bunker.
Pretty ridiculous. Yeah, directly into a bunker in Waltham, Massachusetts. Some might call it a cul-de-sac. Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, the weirdest thing I think was seeing how different states are responding to COVID and seeing that effect on like the citizens, and also just the way that different parts of like towns operated and stuff. So I made a tweet about how in Wisconsin, in Janesville, no one was wearing a mask. And I was like, what is happening? And then I remembered that Janesville is like the place that, you know, it's the place that they pulled Paul Ryan out of a vat of goo at the Heritage Foundation. You know, like where he emerged as like a conservative think tank leader. So it kind of makes, I guess, you know, but then the rest of Wisconsin was totally normal and, you know, responsible. And I mean, Wisconsin's beautiful. I love Wisconsin. People are super nice there. Everything. It's like so jarring. It's so jarring seeing the difference between like one area and then another area, and how local politics or even just like socioeconomic effects can affect the way that people are responding to the virus.
Yeah.
And then in Indiana, we stumbled upon a pool party at our hotel.
Oh, God.
Which was super normal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I was like, what the hell is happening? And we got into our room and we're just like chilling in the room and like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on out there.
I think it's like, I know sometimes we try and avoid politics, and I know we have listeners that want us to avoid politics and try to not be too overtly one way or the other. But I do think that this is a really interesting time that science and scientifically proven hypothesis around COVID and the prevention of COVID have taken this turn into almost like a moral or a philosophical and a political stance.
Yeah.
You know, like I do think we're going to address it. I think we need to, because I think it's part of a story, and I think it's going to be part of the more interesting thing looking back that is going to have emerged as something that people are going to be studying and talking about. And then also, you know, talking just a little bit about the supply chain. And I do some work with PPE and the supply chain around PPE, and just kind of the craziness around that, and just like without getting into too many details on it, but like just how it affects everyone, like all of it. Well, not all of it. We've only got 45 minutes, but like the good parts.
Yeah, no, really. Yeah, no, the really bad. And by the good part, she means the bad part. Jake, roll the tape. So poor Jake, he's like, I've been like, Jake, can you edit the episodes? And he's like, yeah, I'll edit them. And then he's like, there's no files online. And it's and like, and then
what do you mean you need files, Jake?
Right. Just and then it takes them. Me, and then it takes, I thought you thought you made the show by yourself now, Jake. I don't know what's going on. So yeah,
it's been, I thought you just pieced together us saying, and me being like, like,
yeah, I thought there was we don't make new content. It's just rehashing of old stuff constantly. So it's totally fine. So, the one really interesting thing that's been happening. So COVID obviously has affected sort of everyone's, day-to-day lives, right? In different ways.
Yeah.
But it's also really affected the scientific communities, especially. And kind of, the way that that's really been affecting it, or one of the ways that it's been affecting it, I shouldn't say especially, because really, if I don't know. I mean, what would you think has been the hardest hit sort of?
Oh man. Well, it's hard to tell because it's like, I do think, okay, so like meat packing, there was something I did not think was going to be affected by COVID. Right? I mean, that's a pretty huge sector in American economy, or at least a portion of the American economy. And because if you think about that, I would never associate that with one of the things that would be almost immediately impacted by a pandemic.
Well, you never, it's one of those things that I think you don't really associate with that, but I think also it's one of those things we take for granted.
Yes.
Like, oh, of course, like meat, I currently live, growing up in New York City, it's like, hamburger meat or steak or whatever was never really hard to get in the grocery store.
Oh.
And I just always assumed they were cows someplace, but never, like in your brain, you're never like, oh, how does all that meat get to me? And it's like, oh, there's a tremendous industry that does it all and brings it from upstate or Jersey or, wherever, right?
Or wherever there's a meat packing industry, the one they were talking about now that there's like 6 major ones. One of them is in Colorado. And that was one of the ones that was hardest hit. And it's just the conditions and the lack of preparedness and the lack of PPE that affected and just sort of decimated the workforce. Mm. And I also do think it's one of those things that's underreported and almost overlooked entirely.
Well, it still at least doesn't feel like it's really, I think for a lot of people in terms of their day-to-day lives, and at least this is true, I know for me as well, the thing that feels like it's been the most affected is like school kids.
Yes.
Because they're just constantly present. And so, I mean, I don't have kids, but like I have neighbors. And so, yes. you can tell like it's just different. It feels different that everyone is home, including the kids.
Oh my God, yes.
But at the same time, like you said, they're kind of not, it's more of a silent, it's those parts of the economy or parts of industry that we don't really consider that are really, I think, having the biggest impact on them. And of course, and we're not talking about deaths or anything. Like it seemed, clearly from the statistics.
We'll get to that fun one later.
I was going to say, like, clearly from the statistics, the hardest hit populations are minority communities in generally underserved areas,
Yes.
And it seems like part of that, I kind of wonder personally if part of that right now is not, I'm wondering as the caseloads increase and explode in other areas like in the Midwest or in the South, if that doesn't start to hit more
spread.
Yeah. If it doesn't, I think it still will probably be predominantly a socioeconomic thing as opposed to a racial thing. Yeah. But anyways, the challenge, I think, or at least from my perspective, so Marie works in kind of healthcare adjacent, or like I think directly in healthcare. Really, I don't think adjacent is the right word. But so Marie works in healthcare, and then I work in sort of like engineering and big engineering, manufacturing, chemistry, science, the science world, and specifically the information and analytics world. And our industry has been really affected, and it's an interesting it's been interesting seeing or hearing from people and connections and folks that I know who work at kind of major chemical companies or major engineering firms and talking to them and hearing them say, oh, well, we haven't been in the lab in 5 months.
Yeah.
And so thinking kind of how that will affect work, how that will affect
progress,
any
kind of finding.
Yeah. Like progress itself, it almost feels like, I wonder, I was thinking of this the other day that it would be kind of interesting to go back and look at if there's been any studies, and I'm sure there have been, on kind of the effect that previous plagues have had on science.
Yeah.
So, there's like this idea that the Middle Ages created, or the Dark Ages, I guess, created this complete lapse in science in Europe. We lost a lot of information. We kind of regressed back. And so the Middle East and Asia sort of continued developing. Mm-hmm. And then, so it's sort of an interesting, and we caught up eventually. And then, through trade and everything else, like things became somewhat even. And then, till today's world, I guess. I wonder, though, if there's ever been a case like this where it's kind of a worldwide or a global impact.
Yeah. And
like I'm thinking like a volcanic eruption, or like, you know what I mean? Like a 1,000-year flood, or
some sort of seismic event that just freezes everything.
Yeah, exactly. No, really, literally, right? And that's kind of the argument.
I do feel like it's frozen, yeah.
That's the argument for the Dark Ages, too, is that there was, like, supposedly this volcanic eruption that was a theory, and it's been, I don't know if it's really the Dark Ages, but there was a volcano in, like, Java that exploded, mm-hmm. that ignited, I should say, not really explode. I guess it did explode. But it
erupts. It
erupts.
Hello.
And it shot a huge plume of volcanic ash in the atmosphere, and it, like, lowered temperatures by 3 degrees or something. And it led to tremendous famine and death across, like, the entire world.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if, like, in that year, like, I think it was like 1250, 1280, somewhere around there. I'm wondering if there was a noted, I don't know. It's so hard, though, because today we measure everything.
Well, but I mean, the metrics, like their survival and their science would be slightly a different skew than what we're looking at now. I mean, I think it's arguable, like, again, like, okay, so a bunch of people are going to die. It's going to become much harder to live. It's going to become much harder to find food and find resources. But the things to enable finding food and finding resources, the tools, are going to be harder to develop during that phase as well. So it's sort of like the tools to support life become slower to develop. I would almost look at just like the science now, like scientific development, things that are, that you need a group of people working together in a well-supported environment to make any kind of real progress. Those things are going to be slowed down significantly too. Right? I mean, because that's just not happening because we're not there. We can't do that. I think those are kind of roughly the equivalent. I don't know. I mean, now it's like, what is it? Moore's law, where everything is faster by X% over X time. But still, there are things that you can't speed up. Like you can't speed up scientific discovery. You can't speed up to a certain extent, right? Because you have to have a process to be able to test things and understand things.
Yeah,
you physically, and be able to think about things.
Right. No, you physically cannot be in the lab, or as many people can't be in the lab, or machines are being, science is kind of a finite, there's a finite amount of stuff. And then just like people are having trouble with PPE, getting that, a lot of the kind of feedstock chemicals that you'd normally use, those are becoming scarcer because people are shifting to the production of PPE instead.
Yes.
Yes. Which is kind of interesting. So it's weird. I don't think we recognize the effect this will have on kind of,
We've seen it. Yeah.
Industries, the sciences. Yeah. We haven't seen it. The other thing that's been happening. So in kind of, I guess, a positive way, or one interesting development, I think, is companies shifting to the idea that, like, we don't really need all these people to be working in an office.
We don't need asses and seats. At a certain time to be productive. What?
It doesn't really matter if all the work you do is online and on a computer. It doesn't really seem to matter if you're doing it from the office or doing it from home, because you actually tend to work harder from home.
I think that this is a huge, weird paradigm shift. As someone who's worked for corporations where the expectation is you are there at a certain time and you are sort of judged by how long how early you get there, how late you stay there. And it only really matters if your manager or even your manager's manager sees people present to be actively engaged and managed. Like, I'm not a boss unless I can see the people that I am bossing, is sort of, I think, been the past mentality with a lot of corporations. Yeah. Right? If that person's not there, I'm not managing them. I don't know what they're doing, which is just a huge falsity in my head too.
It's completely stupid, because it's like, well, you can't manage them from there. Like, are you kidding me? Noom manages me every single day. I've never even seen the lady who's my Noom coach. You know what I mean? But she's like, you've been eating donuts again, fatty. What are you doing? It's like, oh God, no, I've made Melissa upset. I haven't. No, but really though,
eating them.
You're right though. I think it is kind of a paradigm shift, and I'm honestly, I wonder.
It's an ego shift too, because I think, again, like, what we think of leadership and what we think of management and what we think of like success means my direct ability to influence others. But that is not, and I honestly have seen that in other workplaces, and, just the idea of working from home was scoffed at in corporations that I worked at. I would say less than a decade ago, right? So it's like all of a sudden this comes and it just hard breaks all of that. And it's like nobody can come into the office.
Yeah, but you know what though? It's one of those things. So it's funny. I used to work for a company where being there physically didn't matter how much work you got done. It did not matter at all how much work you got done. Right. What mattered was, are you at your desk? Just kind of being there physically.
As a boss, can I find you? Do I know where you are?
Exactly, yeah. Can I ask you a question? If I call your desk, will you be there to answer the phone?
Exactly.
And even if if the building was on fire and you were like not at your desk because you were putting out the fire, they'd be like, yeah, but like, we pay you to be at your desk.
Which is the famous acronym, right? We pay you to be here.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
Is such
we pay you to be here. Now,
bullshit.
But here's the thing though, Marie. As the cynical determinist that I am, okay, I wonder
what?
I wonder if ultimately the trade-off for convenience of working from home versus privacy and sanctity of your home, is it worth it?
That there's sort of a separation of church and state, like.
Well, yeah. So what I'm saying is now maybe now you work like companies are going to by nature take as much as they can of your work and capital away from you. Right? Like it's not like negative or evil or anything. It's just the way that they're built. Like they want to maximize profits, and that's what they're designed to do.
No, I'm just giggling because it was like, okay, about how many minutes in and we got to the Marxists.
I know. I'm sorry.
No. It's awesome. It's awesome because I was headed there too. No. But I mean, if people who listen to us, they're like, what? Not a single Marxist reference already? You guys don't feel well. You are out of practice.
God, this guy over here loves his company all of a sudden. So the
look at this corporate shell.
Honestly, I legitimately do kind of love the company I work for right now because they're European and they seem to get it a lot better than any American company I've ever worked for. But anyways, but I'm just wondering, like, okay, so you don't have to physically be there for 8 hours a day, right?
Right.
So we're just going to assume, and I know this is happening in my company too, and we normally work from home, but suddenly the people who are newly working from home and haven't had that kind of cultural shift for themselves, I'm getting emails on the weekend. I'm getting emails at night. I'm getting emails out of nowhere. And you kind of feel like, well, I should probably answer this, right? And I saw a thing on Twitter that was really funny. I forget who tweeted it, but they're famous enough, I'm sure, already because it was retweeted like a billion times. I mean, famous, whatever. They've been retweeted. They've gotten accolades for the tweet. they said it. I don't think we should call it working from home. I think we should call it living at work. But I think that's a legitimate. I think it's a legitimate problem.
Well, I think it's a paradigm shift. It's going to have to come with some rules, right? Because I do think that that's the case. I think the one weird thing about my working from home that I've seen is for calls that like before have just all been just teleconference calls, right? All of a sudden everyone's like, well, hey, and I've never seen these people, right? They work in other states. We've only had like we'll maybe see one another face to face once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. But we'll have like monthly calls with 14 different people, 20 different people, whatever it is, right? And we all call in. Now they're all like, hey, we would like for you guys to turn your cameras on so we can see you. And I'm sort of like, wait up. Whoa. We've never seen it. We've never seen each other before, which is okay, right? Because again, it's like, you don't have to see me to know that I'm here. I can understand the physical, you seeing physical cues. You can see people nodding. I get all that science. I get all that behind it. It's more this like sort of reaction to what's happening. And the funny thing is, it's like, y'all don't want to see me now, okay? Because I am scary.
I'm angry. I haven't had a haircut. Yeah.
So frightening right now. But the one thing that's sort of like, that I think is really ironic about this is like, so many people I know, and what I have done is I put a sticker over my camera because I was reacting to another cultural shift, which was privacy, right? Like if you leave your camera on, somebody remotely can come in and be able to access and see it. So everyone I know for a certain period of time, not like less than 2 years ago, stickered over it as, especially at work, stickered over it. So I tried to peel off that sticker and it's like, oh, you can't, there's like, that's done. So I physically can't do that now. And everyone's like, well, but they would be like, well, it would be so nice to see you, Maria. I mean, I feel like we haven't seen you in so long. And I'm like, y'all, first of all, like I said, you don't want to see me. And second of all, like, I'm not going to have the bookshelf and stuff behind me. Like I'm not camera ready like you see on CNN and MSNBC and all the news channels now. Everybody's all decked out with the professional looking backdrops. And I'm scary looking. And even if I could do it, I can't.
Hey, I'm Andy. If you don't know me, it's probably because I'm not famous. But I did start a men's grooming company called Harry's. The idea for Harry's came out of a frustrating experience I had buying razor blades. Most brands were overpriced, overdesigned, and out of touch. At Harry's, our approach is simple. Here's our secret. We make sharp, durable blades and sell them at honest prices for as low as $2 each. We care about quality so much that we do some crazy things, like buy a world-class German blade factory. Obsessing over every detail means we're confident in offering a 100% quality guarantee. Millions of guys have already made the switch to Harry's, so thank you if you're one of them. And if you're not, we hope you give us a try with this special offer. Get a Harry starter set with a 5-blade razor, weighted handle, shave gel, and a travel cover, all for just $3 plus free shipping. Just go to harrys.com and enter 5,000 at checkout. That's harrys.com, code 5,000. Enjoy.
Well, right, you physically cannot because you've ruined your work laptop.
I've ruined my work laptop.
Right, it's fine, which is fine. No, but I do think it's a legit concern. I mean, when does it go from like, okay, for those companies that do really care about seeing the butts in the seats or whatever, right? Yeah. Do they start recording you full time, right? While you're at work? Is there an app where you turn on your work computer and it turns your camera on and it measures if you're there or not, right?
Which is crazy, right?
But not out of the realm of possibility. You know what I mean?
That's exactly it.
What about stuff like, we have the ability on computers to measure active time, right? Yep. Like how much time are you moving your mouse or how much time are you typing or doing things, right? Does that start being the model since you're not physically in the office? So and what do you,
as soon as somebody has the app for that, there's another app that can cheat it, right?
Sure.
Like
but yeah,
there's your inventiveness. There's your social progress right there.
But you know what I'm like, I guess my worry or my concern is for those jobs, it also seems like it is further building if suddenly all of the high paid workers, all of the people who work middle class jobs, all the people who work kind of, if you think about like the column or the stratification of work anywhere, right? You have the people who are kind of, you know, like minimum wage workers doing jobs that are considered like, those are the jobs you have to physically be there for.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And the ones that mostly are doing kind of like service industry work, like, you know, or technology work or engineering work or whatever, all of those are ones that can be decentralized and done at home on a laptop or a powerful enough computer. Right?
I meant to say the essential work is the work you actually have to physically be there. Like the people that are physically there now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I'm wondering, or what I'm wondering though is, as those essential, and even within the essential workers though, there's a stratification, right? There's people who can afford cars and people who can't afford cars, right? Yeah. My wonder, or my kind of question is, if we do shift to all working from home, suddenly, what is the incentive to making public transportation any good? You know, I think it could go both ways. I think it could go both ways. It could go, suddenly you want public transport to be good because no one's buying cars anymore because we all work from home, or public transport gets tremendously worse because the only people who are taking public transport are fast food workers or, you know, whatever.
The people that can't. Yeah,
exactly. Right. The people without the economic and political kind of power, or the people without, you know, perfect world, they'd have the same political power, but, you know, because our politics is dominated by money, the people without the money to make the push to say, yo, you know, we need this train. Like, I need this bus, you know?
Yeah, but I think you're seeing, the interesting thing is about this event too, is that you are seeing that come to the forefront. And I think that is also one of the things that triggers social unrest. Besides acute events such as, you know, open acts of like what we witnessed with, you know, the horror of police brutality, it's also sort of like, again, you're starting to see like the people that are being most affected by COVID, African Americans, people working in, or that are working in cities that have to physically go to a job and are not provided PPE. So they're underrepresented by unions, right? Other things that are kind of like these, all of the stuff that keeps coming up, I feel like that is, you know, again, like you could imagine like if the scenario you just played out with sort of the infrastructure that supports people getting from one place to another, or supports sort of the structure that allows people of different incomes and people, you know, like you were saying, sort of different social stratas to be able to maintain work and to maintain their lives, that starts to erode, that to me would cause more unrest, right? Because again, it's like you're starting to see all of these things, all of these big fractures in our system that are clearly inequitable, really come to the forefront really quickly.
Yeah, but you know, though, but that's part of it that I think, again, is kind of if people no longer need to commute to work, why would anyone want to live in a city?
There you go. Well, that could be.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's the thing I'm wondering. I'm really wondering. I guess I wonder what and I think I read something about this. I can't remember if it was people, like the difference between people who had the money and ability to like flee the cities during COVID, and the people who were stuck there, you know?
And so it's, again, social economics, right?
It is. But that's the part that I wonder about, is like you are hinting at here. If this does lead to more civil unrest, I don't think there's any question that it has.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah.
But as it does,
certainly helped.
As it gets worse, which I think it will inevitably do.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if the response isn't what it's been almost the entire time, which is, well, that's not my community, so who cares?
I think it could go that way. I think it was starting to go that way.
But I think that let me rephrase though too, quickly. Sorry, I do think though that that's been like the one good thing about social media existing. It seems like is suddenly everyone can see when these things happen, and it stops being a question of like, oh well, you know, it's like that's clear.
Right.
That's plain.
Right.
It's plain in front of you. You can't, you know what I mean? So I think it's interesting.
Well, I think it could go that way. Like, why do I care about this isn't my community. These aren't my people. So why should I care? I think you started to see that a little bit earlier with like New York. I heard there was a lot of rhetoric around there. Well, it's like, this isn't New York. We don't have to do this because we're not New York. You know, this state or this state, you heard some local governors and some other officials saying kind of that really heated rhetoric, like, we're not that big city, but we don't have their problems. However, I think the thing with a pandemic is it doesn't care. You know, if you do not eradicate it, it will eradicate you. It will find you. It will, and that's what we're starting to see now. Again, with this tremendous uptick in states that it wasn't considered a quote unquote problem. It wasn't our problem. You're starting to see it, and you're starting to see sort of, again, the officials and the governors that had this one take that it only affected a certain population or a certain type of people or a certain place, starting to say, like, we have to do something because all of a sudden it is our problem. And so I think that may be the equalizer in some ways. And I think also it was a incendiary device to a powder keg that was already going to go off with the issues surrounding Black Lives Matter. So I think that in some ways just amplified the effect, but also brought it to our attention, to my attention, to people who maybe weren't paying as much attention as they should to it and understanding it to the extent that it should. And it sort of also began making you question and rethink and reevaluate a lot of stuff. So I think in some ways I don't want to say it's a positive effect, but it's a necessary effect.
Well, yeah.
So that's good. I mean, it's good that we're questioning and talking about it and starting to have those dialogues. I think my concern is, man, this shit show is far from over. Like, it's going to get worse.
Yeah, it really does feel.
Oh no, it's gonna.
No, it does. It is. It absolutely is. No, I mean, you know, that's one thing that's really interesting, right? So for listeners that didn't know or don't know, I don't know. I'm sure most people know this already, but so I lived outside of Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. Actually, so technically I lived outside of St. Paul, which they're like right next to each other. And since I'm not from there, I have no big shoe in the game between like which city is which infuriates the people of Minneapolis and St. Paul. But so I lived for a while. We lived in downtown St. Paul, in an area called, well, not really downtown St. Paul, like right near downtown, in an area called Miriam Park, which is really nice. And then we lived in Shoreview, Minnesota. So we were sort of, what the weird thing about Minnesota, the weird thing about, I'd say, like Minneapolis, St. Paul that we found, was how oddly stratified it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I mean is, like, you would have one street that was full of $1 million mansions and homes. And then the next street was like, you know, was rough, was dangerous, you know, or it looked dangerous. It looked terrible. It looked and felt like you were in an area that was not great. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd have those disparities constantly. And so you'd have, you know, and it was literally like on the side of the train tracks. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was like you had the good side of the train tracks and then you'd cross over and it would be the quote unquote bad side of the train tracks. And everyone just kind of seemed to like accept that was the case, that like, oh, look, we live with such opulence and on this side of the train tracks is such abject poverty, you know? And it was crazy. Like, and I grew up in New York. I've seen homelessness and poverty. I've lived in poverty myself as a child. Like, but seeing it so bare out there, you know, mm-hmm. it's pretty intense. It was pretty intense every other day, you know? It was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And that it's kind of that way across the entire Twin Cities, it seemed like, to me at least, as an outsider, was you would have, even in Shoreview, which is like a suburb outside, we lived in Little Canada, technically, which I guess is supposed to be not a super nice part of that area. But then on the other side of a road was Vadnais Heights, which again is like $1 million homes, like $100 million homes. And it's like, so at the same lake that you'd go fishing, there'd be a guy in like a brand new, Rolls Royce or whatever. And then there's a guy putting up from his trailer park with, 91 Jeep. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like the disparity was really significant.
Yeah, it was really,
so that like income inequality,
uh-huh,
just generally, I think breeds a lot of discord, regardless of kind of the racial issues. But then when you add on top of it the racial issues that do clearly exist, it's just a powder keg for stuff. It's going to happen. Things are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
And the Minnesota police are just statistically were not very good. They had they were just not good. They were not good at their jobs. It seems like just overall, and whatever the reason is for that. I think I saw something that was like a 30% closure case on murders or something crazy. Like that's nuts,
Yeah. I think like I'm borrowing it from Kara Swisher, who hosts the podcast Pivot with Scott Galloway. And she was the one that predicted, I thought early on that I hadn't even considered it in talking about COVID and the pandemic. She's like, the next big thing that happens is distinct social unrest. There's going to be events that are really kind of large and that are going to change a lot. And I was like, what? Seriously? Huh. Didn't really think about that. And, looking at it sort of on a philosophical, intellectual, you're like, I can kind of see that here, but I don't. And then all of a sudden that, this happens and you're like, oh, damn.
Well, it's one of those,
there's a whole difference between like sort of the intellectual, philosophical exercise and real life. And it's like, that to me was the sort of also the wake up call of it. It's not just about like, I think that personally for me, the thing that was really important was to understand, like, if I look at myself and I think about myself, I don't think I'm racist. However, I am racist because I exist in a world that validates who I am as a white woman in sort of a systemic racist world.
Well, you
know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and
I don't like to think like, oh, I have certain views of minorities and stereotypes, but at the same time, I don't exist outside of that vacuum, and that was the hard check. It's like I can't exclude myself from the problem, and I can't be like, oh, teach me about this because I don't know. It's like, no, I have to learn about it. I have to understand it, and I have to change.
Well, you know what? I think though too, your brain, the human brain is set up to do. The human brain is lazy. Shit, the brain is super lazy. No, really though, the brain is super lazy, and so you are kind of ingrained.
No, your brain is super lazy.
You're ingrained with these kind of tricks or whatever that make in a previous time when we were, and we have not evolved at all since we were cavemen.
Clearly, yeah.
We have but really though, like just in terms of like how long it takes, just in terms of science, right? We have not.
Science, yeah.
If you if you found a caveman and you gave him a hat and a skateboard, he'd be me. You know what I mean? Like we're even as hairy as each other. So, there's like no who am I kidding? I haven't been able to ride a skateboard in 5 years, Marie.
I was going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't going to say anything.
No. But no, I can't get my fat ass on a skateboard anymore. But so in previous times where those kinds of like prejudicial jumps to belief or whatever would have maybe been useful for us, in today's world where we don't need those anymore, just like any other kind of, any other kind of fight or flight response or other kind of uncomfortable response that you have can turn into something you need to work on. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with this, it seems kind of obvious that, I don't know, everyone is racist in some way. You know what I mean? And it's not like a negative. It's not, I think the problem is that there's sort of that difference between overt racism, and we're two white people talking about this. So what the fuck do we know?
Oh.
At the end of the day, really, I mean, we can speak from our own experience, and
we know we have to change. Like, I think that's the thing you have to come down to.
You know what I'm saying?
We don't know the effects of it. Like, I know I have to be more aware of the effects that I cause and add to.
Well, but here's the thing though, right? I know from growing up that when I can't say fully either way that, how to change things or whatever, but I know at least that being viewed as, say, let's take something that everyone can kind of experience in some way, right? Mm-hmm. Which is appearing poor versus appearing rich, right? People treat you differently.
Yes.
There's no question, right?
Yes.
So why wouldn't you think that they would treat you differently in other cases, right? If you appeared like what they think a criminal looks like, right. Or if you appeared what they think a Nobel laureate looks like, or if you appear what they think a train conductor looks like, whatever,
right.
Your brain is lazy and it makes those jumps. And so it's not hard to think that maybe that's the view you have, I don't think I personally ever recognized, I guess, sort of how weird it was growing up in New York, or not really weird, but how many other kinds of cultures I was exposed to, and even just how that changed my opinion of people until I got to college in New Hampshire, where suddenly, like, I'd never met really a Native American person before, right? And then you get to school, or I got to school, and suddenly people were talking about, there were these, again, kind of like racist stereotypes of Native Americans, right? And you're like, oh, that's so weird. Like, I never would have expected any of that, because I hadn't grown up with that as a thing.
You haven't been
right.
Exposed,
that was ingrained, right? So it's just a thing your brain does.
Yeah, no,
and you need to be better about it. Just don't be shitty about it. You know what I mean? Everyone's brain is shitty like that. Just don't do it. Just be fucking better.
Well, I think the thing that's really hard too is that we are still rewarded for privilege, and and again on a sort of a subconscious basis, that's hard to break and hard to perceive as well. Like, I just go back to that video that was taken a while back of the African-American bird watcher in Central Park, right? And the woman who had her dog off of the leash when clearly it was a leashed area. And so he just asked her to put the dog back on the leash. And she basically threatened to call the cops on him to say that he was menacing her, knowing full well what that dynamic was, knowing full well what that power looked like, and using it. And I think, to me, that was sort of this low point of insidiousness. And I was like, you immediately start to think to yourself, well, I would never do that. I'm not that person. But the thing is that you are that person, because that's, you're not in a vacuum. Like, you have that, as a white woman, I have that privilege. I have that. I've been sort of systematically exposed to that. And what you have to do is you have to, like, to me, it's like just knowing that and being like, how that is completely effed up, and how do you start to address it, and how do you start to try and unwind it, is at least like is like at least the first consideration I started to think about, and just having that space to think about it. Cause it's like immediately you're like, well, I'm not racist. I don't view them. I've never used the N-word. I've never done this. But that's to your point, that's like this sort of overt that's a overt racism. That doesn't mean that there's not other ways that it affects you and that you are affected by it or propagating it. I think
the challenge too, and I can kind of understand to some extent some of, I think I grew up. So when I was growing up, my mom and my dad got divorced, and my mom, I kind of went to my mom's house like it was like vacations almost. I mostly spent time at my dad's house, and my dad was dirt poor. You know what I mean? Like my family growing up was extremely poor, and I was lucky because I had my mom. Mm-hmm. So like I could go to my mom's house for like a weekend or whatever, and like pretend like I wasn't living in shit. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But for the most part, we were living super poor, right? And so I can kind of understand from a poor. If you're a guy or if you're a kid who grew up in like, subsidized housing, mm-hmm. right? A white guy who grew up in subsidized housing, mm-hmm. who, didn't have the kind of opportunities that other kids really had and had to work super hard to get everything and all that other shit that comes with being poor, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you get older and you kind of succeed for yourself and everything else, and someone tells you, well, you got that because you were benefited in some way, right? Mm-hmm. Or you mm-hmm. got advantages that other kids didn't have. Mm-hmm. I think it's really easy to be defensive and think to yourself like, well, I did not have any privileges. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like mm-hmm. I mm-hmm. did not get any help, mm-hmm. And so I think it's easy to feel defensive and be that way. And I think that that's what's happening for a lot of people is they're thinking like, no. And so for me, at least, I would like the argument to become, and I think it's something that Black Lives Matter has been good about mm-hmm. more, is turning it into more of an economic argument too. Cause I don't think you're ever going to get people on your side necessarily by saying like, we all have privilege. We all have that. And if you are, being a kid who grew up poor, who had like friends from other races and stuff, mm-hmm. They were treated differently. You know what I mean? Like that's not in question at all, but the difference, I think, or I wonder if part of the argument shouldn't be an economic one as well. I think they've done a good job. Yeah. I think they've done a really good job, or that's become part of the conversation in a different way than it was before.
Yeah. I think it's important. I think it's important to evaluate and see each of those things, right? Like your gender, your sex, your race, your economic, like each of those things carry its own privilege and its own baggage. And how does that affect sort of the systems that you're working in? I think you have to evaluate that. Like, I think it's to your point, those things, they all intersect. You can't take one out and just be able to say you're going to solve the problem by just solving that one thing. It's a web of, it's a symbiotic system.
One thing that has been really, Katie just texted me, close the umbrella, LOL, because of the thunderstorm that we're now having here in Waltham. One thing that's been interesting, I think, in all of this COVID stuff too, besides like kind of the supply chain issues that we've been talking about, is the challenge of people feeling like science becoming politicized.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that for me, at least, as if you've listened to this show, science is political. Science has always been political. In all of the episodes we've ever done, going back to kind of the very first, the first ones.
Yes.
We've talked about how scientists interact with the world around them. Obviously, they are affected by the things that go on in their societies. Funding from political institutions really significantly affects what they're able to do or what they can't do. So this idea that like suddenly with COVID, science has become really political, in my mind, it's kind of it's like a short-sighted view of history. But at the same time, yeah, let me finish that thought. Sorry. At the same time, no, it's all good. At the same time, science has become, I don't know if science itself necessarily has become So if we look at, like, say, the last 100 years, right? There have been different points, or let's say the last 200 years, maybe. There have been points where science has been on the side of different parts of the political spectrum. And even on similar issues. Mm-hmm. So if we look at, say, let's look at, for instance, sustainability and energy, right? Mm-hmm. Back in the very beginning, energy development probably would not have occurred at all. The technology to develop energy wouldn't have occurred at all, if not for the support of sort of the aristocratic wings of the different political parties, right? The rich people who wanted to make themselves richer based on, you know, getting oil and energy production and everything else, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about, like, the way that science interacts with the world, or the way that technology interacts with the world through engineering, it's almost necessarily political, because, you know, how else do you get, if you know, let's put it this way, right? If it weren't for the interstate highway system, would cars be as ubiquitous as they are today? Probably not, right? Without the development of gas pipelines, would air travel be possible because of the easy transport of fuel? Probably not. Without government regulation and help in getting internet and wiring and infrastructure built for telecommunications, would we have the internet today? Probably not. You know what I mean? So that's outside of even just the idea of, like, government funding stuff because would make a good weapon, and then it later turning into, like, Velcro or whatever, you know?
Which would make a good weapon.
Which would not make a great weapon. So it's,
Velcro?
You know, so it's one of those weird things where it's kind of a short-sighted, I think, view of history to say that science has always been on the side of, say, the liberal side or the conservative side or whatever, right? Like, science is kind of, science just needs money, you know, and support. So science has always kind of just been like a mercenary. Now, there are some scientific fields that have always kind of been leaning one way or the other, you know? So oil and gas, which requires a lot of capital investment and everything else, tends towards the kind of oligarch class, you know? Whereas sustainability and environmentalism and whatever tends towards, like, the granola class, right? And that tends to be associated with, like, liberalism, but not always, right? Teddy Roosevelt was a huge naturalist, was a big proponent of
yes.
You know, so I think, like, science is always political. What's been different today is that one side has so powerfully turned against science and kind of in almost a reactionary way, even in things that would be good for them, which doesn't make sense.
Well, I think the difference I see between the two, because I agree with you, like, science, it has political, like, all the political variability that you're talking about. I think what happened now, or one of the differences, is that all of a sudden it directly affects the individual, right? So you went from something that if I'm just, you know, Joe everybody, I may not understand how the oil industry works and where it gets its funding from, but I do know that I have to wear a mask, and how does that make me feel? Or, like, I do know I have to stay inside, and how does that affect me? So I think it's almost like it all of a sudden has come down to this, like, microcosm of directly affecting the individual really quickly, which I think before was a little bit more intangible. And I think when you can say, like, again, just taking the whole mask argument, like, you have to wear a mask, or the best way to prevent this virus from spreading is wearing a mask, then you can leverage that individual many different ways, or incite that individual in different ways, right? It's a civil liberties argument. It's like, it's, you know, it's a science argument. You have more control over that.
Yeah, I think
good or bad. To your point, and what's happening now is not great.
No, and I agree with you there that it's kind of a more because it feels more personal, right? It feels like that. Yeah. I also, though, wonder, at least personally, and, you know, listeners know we're pretty. I mean, Marie and I are both irreligious, right? We're not necessarily anti-religion.
No.
I would argue.
No.
But we're not like, we're not evangelical, right?
We're not evangelical.
In any way, evangelical atheist or Christian or Buddhist or any of them, right?
Yes. I wonder how the Satanists are doing during this.
Probably doing terribly.
Right? I mean, I wonder how the Satanists are.
No, they're probably doing
Shout
fine.
out Satanists.
Can't have big orgies. I guess, well, actually, the masks might make it fun. Kind of a mystery. Whoa. I recognize that mole. Anyways, the challenge I think with today's kind of scientific politicization is it's kind of nonsensical. And I wonder how much of that is driven by sort of a knee-jerk distrust of science that's been kind of bred through frankly evangelical religious dogma,
Absolutely.
So starting from being anti-evolution, right, all the way up to, and it's not, and conservative presidents have not always been bad on science. No. Reagan was relatively good, I would say, for science.
I want to say Nixon.
Nixon was very good on science, I would argue.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an interesting. I'd say honestly, most presidents have been pretty good on science. It's hard. It's like hard to find a president who was like really bad. But I think the first one who was really bad on it was George W. Bush.
Right.
Because he was anti stem cell research. And so it kind of began. And so I wonder what part of this anti-science thing is a concerted. I kind of wonder if it's not like it's like you create a monster and then it gets out of control, So ExxonMobil and these other oil companies start in the 80s and kind of, early 90s arguing that climate change is fake. It's not a real thing, whatever. But primarily they're arguing that so that they can get their ducks in a row to kind of corner the market on sustainable energy development, Right. And then when they're finally like, no, it actually is real, the monster they helped create and funded is still arguing against them. And so now they're like, they're not only fighting people who were like, you lied that whole time. They're also fighting people they used to help who are like, wow, you got bought by China, So it's like it's a really weird situation where you have kind of science, which is always political, but is held up to this paragon of whatever. And you have one side that kind of seems to fight it. The other thing too, I wonder, is science almost seems necessarily to be a global endeavor.
Yes.
It's sort of like it necessitates globalism, kind of.
Yes.
Or at least the way that it works now necessitates globalism. And
it should necessitate globalism. I mean, it should be a global effort.
Yeah, but and that's because some of the questions are so big that you need other countries to help you.
Right.
And I think part of nationalism has also gotten drug up into all of this, where it's like, well, I don't want China getting my science secrets, and it's like, well, then we don't get their science secrets.
Considering they're the ones that gave us the genome. Right. The whole for COVID.
Yeah. And it kind of,
which we wouldn't have had. Yeah.
And I think things like this and, the what's the word? Things like this with pandemics and the, just right around the corner, alien invasion and disclosure. It's things like that.
And again, we got Marxism and we got some aliens.
We did people. Both.
You're welcome. Bingo.
In both of those cases, it's a real, it's a global challenge. So the whole globe gets involved. But when your country, or when, part of me wonders, I don't think it's fair necessarily to say that this is Republicans being bad on science. I think just Trump is just a fucking.
Well, yeah, before we get into that, because I agree with you, I also think the advent of the Tea Party and the sort of the social,
yes. the merging
I think the advent of the Tea Party coming into this and saying the individual liberties, like the government can't tell me what to do, has been sort of this ongoing, this growing monster, because it's not so much science telling you to wear the mask, it's government telling you to wear the mask. And so the government is directly infringing upon your social liberties, right? Like, well, it's that nanny state can't tell me what to do. To me, I correlate kind of back to the rise of, so some of the rise of nationalism, but also a lot of the Tea Party, right? That individual sort of, I don't know, again, this very much, I'm going to say it's very entitled. It's a very entitled privilege. Like, I don't have a responsibility. I have a self-responsibility. I got to take care of myself. I don't have some government, some big government mandating what is the best for me. I know what's best for me.
You know, it just like people say, you know, there's no atheist in foxholes. There's no libertarians begging the government to let them pay for their own ventilator. You know,
right?
It's like a stupid. It's such a silly. And like, you know what? And again,
where is that now, man? Where's that now?
It's
coming back because now people don't want to wear masks. Over my dead body, I'll wear a mask. It's like,
what doesn't make sense is do you get to argue against the nanny state when it's your own nanny state? Like, you know, Trump is at these news conferences and people are like, are you gonna wear a mask? And he's like, no, why? Because those fucking nerds told me to. I don't even like those nerds. I just have to play nice with them on TV. You know, it's like you have the entire kind of like Republican
apparatus
administration being like, please shut up. Like, please stop. Please stop. You are irreparably harming us and our brand. And he's like, I don't care. You know, which is kind of refreshing, but also terrifying.
It's what's so scary about it is it's like, it is the one thing that the Republicans can't fight, right? Because you can't say, if I ignore it long enough, if I ignore wearing a mask long enough, this whole thing will go away, which I think is what they were hoping, right? I think we've gotten it solved. It's summertime. We're done with this. Like, they kind of made this conscious effort to be done with it. And it's like, it's a pandemic. It's not managed. It doesn't wear down. Like, it's not a war of attrition against the pandemic. The pandemic's going to win.
Oh yeah. And
it's going to win the war of attrition. And that's what I don't think they got. Like any other sort of topic or person or adversary they put up against Trump or they put up against the current Republican Party, they just sort of wear them down, right? It's like the rock in the river will be worn down to a smooth stone. But this is like, that's not going to happen. It's not the same thing. And I think they're finally getting it. And they're finally starting to freak out a little bit. Like, he's not the leader that, you know, he'd be great if this was just some sort of Hillary Clinton that we could just kind of belittle and ignore. But, you know, we can't have rallies. We can't have, you know, we can't argue personal liberties. We can't, like, it's going to keep coming.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing though that I think is going to be frustrating or will be frustrating or could be frustrating is also, you know, when the political sides are only good on science when it benefits them.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, you know, look at like nuclear energy, right?
Yes.
Nuclear energy would have probably kept us out of the Middle East, would have stopped climate change likely, or at least would have significantly slowed it, would have made energy cheaper, more easily available, and is quite safe, right? But the other side, to the ones who were lambasting right now, said it wasn't safe enough. It was bad for the environment. It was, you know, whatever, right? So it's, I think, it's a really interesting thing that it's one of those questions I think that scientists are constantly asking themselves, which is, well, how do we get a fair, like, science kind of doesn't, it's part of the reason we did the show, was it's like science won't ever be told the way that it should be or could be if it's non-scientists telling people about it, you know?
And we love spooky stuff. That's the other reason.
We do love spooky stuff too. Marie, we're going to get killed in the comments for this episode.
Are you think?
I'm so excited for it. That's, dear listeners, that's it. We're so happy.
Oh, come on.
We're so happy.
We're going to end. Let's end with one. Let's end with just kind of where we are with Animal Crossing. How's that? Nice neutral. We can finish on Animal Crossing. Let's finish on Animal Crossing. On good news, I did really well on the bug off yesterday. Me too. And oh my god! And I was telling Chris, we have a new island villager. He is it's a she. It's a he or she, doesn't matter. Its name is Sydney. It's a koala, and it sings. It's outside singing in these little non-melodic tune, and it's it just warms my heart. Pretty adorable. I'm pretty sure if you put a radio down near them and you play the radio, they will sing to the radio song. Are you kidding me? I'm like fairly certain that can happen. I've seen people do compilations of that on YouTube. That's the first time I heard it. I sent Chris a video of it because the first time we heard it, we were like, my daughter and I were playing. We were like, what is that? We're like looking around the house. We're like, what the heck? And we're like, no, it's coming from the game. And we see this little like koala, and the koala's going beep, boop, boop, beep, boop, boop, beep, boop, 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 beep. And I'm like, oh my God. So cute. Anyways, good times. Sorry. Dear listeners, no, it's great. I'm actually playing a game right now called Maneater where you get to play as a shark and like eat humans. It's awesome. Oh my God. It's nice when I see videos of people on the beach without masks on and I'm like, I want to be a fucking shark. It's great. Spread disease in my country, will ya? Anyways, dear listeners, we'll be back next week with another episode on time travel. You guys, wear a mask. Wear a mask, please. Wash your hands. Stay safe. We love you all. Wash your hands. We love you all. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host, Marie Mayhew. If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it. Because we love doing that. We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard. Woohoo! And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening. Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.
Qualify for the CPA exam in 1 year with the University of Delaware's Master of Science in Accounting practice. Accounting is a dynamic, fast-growing field. Your professional background combined with a Master of Science in Accounting practice from the University of Delaware's Lerner College of Business and Economics can position you as a top candidate. You'll qualify for the CPA exam. Graduates from any major can apply for this program. Earn your